am so excited to introduce our keynote for today. This is Jim Schwab. He is formerly with the American Planning Association National, right, at the national level. And he retired just on May 31st of this year. He actually owns a consulting company in Chicago. We were very fortunate to be able to secure him. I just want to read a little bit of his bio. Look at that. I'm not going to do all this. He's going to talk about some of this. This is what I aspire to. Okay, his career has reflected his double penchant for both urban planning and communication. At the University of Iowa, he obtained master's degrees in both urban and regional planning and journalism. He has combined these skills in his writing using the analytical skills of the planner and the narrative skills of the journalist to probe major social, economic, and environmental issues. Over time, Jim has expanded APA's profile in planning for natural hazards and the presence of its hazards planning research center to include work on wildfires, landslides, and other hazards, with overseas outreach work in the Caribbean, Sri Lanka, Taiwan, and New Zealand. Oh, I bet that was lovely. As well, had to just stop right there. As well as the U.S. Gulf Coast after Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Ike. He has spoken in numerous venues in the U.S. and abroad. He has a BA in political science from Cleveland State University and MAs in both journalism and urban and regional planning from the University of Iowa. From 2007 to 2009, he served as adjunct faculty at the University of Illinois Chicago, and since 2008 at the University of Iowa, teaching graduate level urban planning classes on planning for disasters. Jim is married to Jean Schwab, a retired Chicago public schools teacher. They have 2 adopted daughters as well as 2 former foster daughters. Please help me welcome Jim Schwab.
Thank you. And despite that introduction, the first thing I want to say about this exercise that we're about to do is this is not about me, it's about you. There are some interesting things in introducing this, what we're about to do for the next hour and a half, that I want to mention. One, I thought this was a really interesting discussion, particularly when they got to questioning Dr. Oden about some of the things that were going on, because I always find it interesting to either validate or some of the things we've been doing for years at a national level in introducing a lot of the ideas that you're discussing, or to question some of them on occasion. And we, it's an iterative process. We keep learning. Every disaster is a new learning experience. I was in a conversation with this fellow earlier, in which I was saying that one of the fascinating things for me about what I do is that the thing that makes it not a job but a career is the opportunity to learn something new every single day that I go to work on this stuff. I can rarely think of a day when I have not learned something that I didn't know when I woke up in the morning. It makes it challenging also teaching this material in the last 10 years at the University of Iowa, because every year I have to update my materials. I don't teach Shakespeare like a. What?
I'm sorry. I don't think you're on.
Oh, well, we thought I was. I don't know. I'm not sure how I turn on.
Okay. Okay. So he's just gonna have to speak a little louder.
There is nothing to the
Okay.
room.
So you'll just have to project in the back of the room. So sorry.
Okay.
You're turned on for me, but there's no sound system for the room.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've always thought my voice carried enough, but.
Me too. But
Yeah. Okay. So, are people kind of able to hear me in the back? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will do that. So, I've with regard to my teaching, I've often said, I don't teach Shakespeare. I can't bring out the same lecture notes every year. Every year I've got a new group of students who are coming from all sorts of directions, wanting to learn this material, and I'll talk more about that at lunchtime when we do the presentation. But I have to revise every single year because we learn from your experiences in going through these disasters. What works, what doesn't work, what used to work that doesn't work anymore, and so on. So what you're about to do is extremely important. The second thing I want to mention here is that we're winging it a little bit, and I'm winging it a bit on the suggestion of Dr. Oden. So if it doesn't work, it's not my fault. No, we're going to play along with this and see where we end up. There are two things that I want to do with all of you. First is to get a sense of where you feel your community is at and where you're at in terms of the resources and the issues that you're confronting. You've heard some interesting presentations already, and you're familiar with what's going on, far more familiar than I can possibly be with what's going on the ground here and in the neighboring counties that you come from. So we're going to take about half an hour to get an assessment of the things that you think are important in terms of where you're at now. The second half, we're going to shift gears, and I want you to focus on where should you be, where would you like to be in the future. Knowing what you know now about the need to prepare, about the issues that you confront, what are the resources that you may feel you should acquire or develop? What are the kinds of capabilities, capacities that would be better at some future point? And we can decide what that point may be, but ultimately the point that matters is when the next disaster happens, right? And we don't know that. When we're done with that, we'll spend another half hour right before lunch letting each of your groups report back. And one thing I can promise you from experience, because I've done a number of these groups in the past and workshops and roundtables and so on, is you won't all come up with the same answers. I can guarantee you that. We're going to hear some some diverse responses to these questions, and then it'd be interesting for you to have these archived, have these part of the record of this roundtable, and kind of look at how you got to different issues and responses, and how they might compare, and how you put all the pieces together. So, I found out that there are apparently 37 of you at the moment. We've got 5 easels. So we're going to ask you to break up into groups of about 7 or 8. Give a nice even divide. And that's actually a nice, I think actually that's an ideal size of group because as long as you're all willing to speak up, no wallflowers in this group, are there? See, if you ask if anybody wants to identify as a wallflower, they won't do it, right? It's like a scene from, have any of you ever saw the Monty Python scene from Life of Brian, where he's up on this balcony and they all have mistaken him for Jesus, and he's, and he says, "You must learn to think for yourselves. You must be individuals." And the whole crowd in unison says, "We are individuals." And then there's one person in the back of the crowd who says, "I'm not." So participate. Be individuals anyway. So 7 or 8 of you for each group. It's a nice group to allow everybody to have a chance to really contribute significantly to this. I want you to do a couple of things. One is find somebody who takes notes on the easel. That's that individual who speaks up and says, "I'm not an individual." And somebody who will serve as the spokesperson for your group when it comes time for each group to report out. Somebody who it's good if you choose that up front, because then that person can be thinking, how do I want to frame this for a 5-minute report from our group to summarize what we've done? Okay? So do those 2 things first so that you've got your stuff. So any questions on what the assignment is? I know it's a little bit vague, but I want to leave room for some creativity as well. If not, get into groups. I would encourage you actually to come from behind the table to sit in a bit of a circle around your easel So just to ease the discussion, so nobody's feeling more remote. So,
So we, starting on where we're at now, we had a pretty large jurisdiction when you count Dr. Huff is responsible for 35 counties. So we narrowed it down a little bit. We went to Van Zant, Cherokee, and Smith County. Smith County I'm responsible for in my regular job, and it worries me that we don't have a long-term recovery committee with nearly 250,000 people that live in that county. Cherokee County looks a lot like Van Zant County in population, and no long-term recovery committee. And then, of course, Van Zant County, we're in the process of finalizing that permanence in the long-term recovery group. What we do have currently in Smith County is an organization called East Texas Community Foundations. They were here the night of the tornado. Kyle Penny, who works in my building, was coming back from the Metroplex, stopped, spoke to the judge, spoke to me, offered their services. If your county didn't want to set up their own nonprofit status, East Texas Community Foundations is there to do that for you. So if you want to start a youth soccer league, or you want to start a long-term recovery group, East Texas Community Foundations will manage the fiscal end of that. That includes an audit. The person who donates money gets a thank you letter, a check request comes in, they write that out, they mail it to the contractor. So we elected to become our own, Van Zant County elected to become our own long-term recovery group. So we talked about meeting on May 15th. I think it was maybe May 18th. We had a work group meeting, and we wordsmithed every sentence of what this organization's mission was, who we were going to help, the terms of service for the board, how we would deal with the survivors and their claims. In other words, we would only write checks to contractors, people to fix or replace or build things for our survivors. And of course, all the other stuff you have to have, like the non-disclosure, confidentiality statements and non-discriminatory statements, all of those things. And then where will we maintain our records, and all that stuff has to be done. We've done that, and now we're waiting on the final okay from the feds on our nonprofit status. Kind of expect that to happen. I think Josh said Christmas time. Is that right, Sean?
Yes, I'll go with that.
Okay.
Have a winner.
We hope.
Whatever the IRS tells me.
That's the correct answer, yes. But we're hoping Christmas. So where would we like to go? I think there was several comments, and I may have overridden some of those, but year one, we would like to have our counties, the other two counties that we mentioned here, working on their long-term recovery group. And of course, that means we have to decide, or those organizations would have to decide, where does that money go, who spends it, how they spend it, how do we represent our community. And I think it's real important to do that, to get the trust and buy-in from the residents of that jurisdiction. But then in a 3 to 5 year period, maybe start talking about a multi-jurisdictional organization that looks at maybe the COG, the Council of Government level organization. There is so much Homeland Security money, mitigation money, lots of monies flow through the COGs that you would naturally benefit from, so that you don't elect somebody for a 2 year period and they don't do anything because there's no money. there's plenty of opportunity to improve. I mean, this is what the toolkit is going to provide everybody, is the resources, the people to go to help rebuild in a more healthy way, more permanent way. But a lot of that money exists in a COG setting. So having that multi-jurisdictional recovery group, I think, would be something that we would work on in a 3 to 5 year period.
Okay.
That's it.
Anything from anybody else on the team? Did you want to add?
I'll just add a
Yeah.
couple of things.
Just speak up.
Hi, I'm Sharon Roberts. I'm the lawyer for Net Health, and one of the things I would just guard the groups against is that when you're setting up a group like this, it's going to be an all-volunteer organization. There are unique challenges to all-volunteer organizations. Sometimes as a governor, when you're a board acting as a governor, you have your governor's hat on, but then you may think, well, now I've got to go out in the field and do my work, and so now I'm a worker bee. But that's not going to take away your governor's hat. So when you start doing your research on how to set up your nonprofit, if that's the way you decide to go, make sure and look at those unique challenges that are out there for all volunteer organizations, because they are, when you don't have a good division between governance versus administration, it can sometimes become murky. And you need to make sure and think about risk and think about how you can delineate those roles on a day-to-day basis for the people that are acting as both governors of the organization, fiduciaries of the money, versus going out and boots on the ground doing work. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's fantastic contribution, yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you, and we'll hopefully find time to let you ask questions of other groups, but I'm going to ask you to hold that until we get all the groups reported, and then you can kind of see the big picture. So I'm going to move down here.
All right, I'm Olivia Hemby, and our group was an interesting mix because we've got 3 representatives from a state agency, 3 students, and a local LEPC. So we kind of approached it as more of a look at it from a generality and not necessarily jurisdiction specific. And we also looked at starting from the bottom going up, and then how does the state kind of deal with some of those issues. Again, I'll warn you, we're from an animal state agency, so that's mostly our focus, but we do a lot with the natural disaster side of stuff, which is a lot of coordination with local jurisdictions. Just looking at where we are now as a group, most of us actually are personally from smaller rural jurisdictions. So we're used to that kind of, what's my hometown like? And it's small. We probably have very limited infrastructure. We've got a girl from upstate New York who has no grocery stores in her hometown. So what do you worry about as a local? Okay, where's my infrastructure? What is the extent of the damage? And is it something that we did not expect? Maybe, how many folks expect 7 tornadoes to hit you at one time? How many folks expect a hurricane to cover pretty much the entire Gulf Coast and not just one specific region? And how many folks all the way up in the Panhandle anticipate taking in thousands of refugees from the coast? Are you prepared as a smaller jurisdiction to take in an influx of people from a disaster that may not necessarily have touched your jurisdiction originally? So that was something that we talked about. So the displacement of families, communication gaps, again, not just between jurisdictions, but to your public. How do you make sure that you have information getting to those local jurisdictions and your citizens, and are they engaged? Or is it that, well, it's never going to touch me, so why should I worry about it? And then, as always, the availability of funding. Money does drive a lot of your capabilities. If you can't fund even the planning group, you can't pay to put them together in a room or buy the equipment you need or that sort of piece, it can be very challenging. I think rural communities as a whole get very creative on finding those resources because the rule of the day is neighbors helping neighbors. Rural communities, I think, as a general rule, are very good at that networking piece. I mean, they talked about the COGS. You can reach out to the regional levels And that's something that might just be a normal everyday thing. I rely on my neighbor to come help me if I'm in need, and I'll help them as well. And so kind of spreading that mentality to the official side of it. Okay, maybe we can use funding with another group and that sort of piece. What we want moving forwards, outside of more money, and staff and equipment and all of the other fun stuff, we did talk a little bit about some of the challenges of those welfare services after a disaster. Everything from, okay, can I get a personal funding from maybe the federal government or other groups, the 501c3s or local charities that can get me back up on my feet, but other things like how do you coordinate getting unemployment checks to people who have been displaced? Is that something that you've looked at and planned for? If you don't know where they are, how do you get that to them? And how do they know to reach out for that? The communications of the disaster plan to the public, how do you break it down and make it digestible? Not just overwhelm people with, oh my gosh, there's all these things I didn't think about, but here's some things that I can do to be better prepared and push that out locally as well. And make it something that they're interested in. And then again, that establishing a long-term recovery group is vital for a community. We deal with livestock, and a lot of folks who don't kind of understand how vital agriculture, not just livestock, but the plant-based pieces and other things, can be that huge economic base in rural communities. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think about that, then you don't realize how important it is for your long-term recovery. Because that's not just an economic income. I mean, that's a family that's a major part of your community. And how do you reach out to them? How do you make sure that their needs can be planned for and taken care of, and help you get back up on your feet so you can recover? So, and then other local businesses as well. So creating that group, and not just a immediate back on, food on your plate and a roof over your head, but looking forward is what we were looking at.
Okay. Anything from any other member contributions?
I think she
You're good?
explained it better than we talked about it.
John Woody King, Range County Emergency Manager. We took a little different approach. We took where are we at now? We have two different counties. We have Van Zandt County and Rains County. We were personally impacted by the tornadoes that brought this group together. Where we're at now, we're at a point where Van Zandt County's at a point where they're so far along. They've got people coming up that they just now found 2 weeks ago. They're working on the needs. They're finding the guy that's fishing and hunting to feed his family, living in whatever he's living in. They're trying to solve those problems. Those are always going to be there after the event. We'll handle those as they come on. Frustrations. Why aren't you doing more? I've been trying to get information. I need to get this done. I need to get this done. I'm a survivor. I'm a victim. Well, the frustration works both ways, because I'm looking at the survivor and the victim going, well, where's your third bid on your house getting fixed? Where's the information I asked you 6 weeks ago? If you don't give me, I can't give you. So there's where the frustration and butting heads and I want, well, I need. We got to come together at a meeting point there. All right, now, Rains County, we got no clue, because we don't have anything set up as far as this going on. We dumped it off on the church groups because we had a much smaller affected area. I had 20 homes, 20 families. They had places to go. They had family. They had friends. Like she said, we came together. We helped each other out. We moved on, and the churches are taking care of them, and families taking care of them. So now, where we want to be. I'm trying to rush through this because I only got 10 minutes.
Less than that, actually. 5 minutes for that.
Okay. So where we want to be utopia. That's where we want to be, but we're not going to get there. The biggest thing we want to do is get people educated. If fire departments, we go to the schools every year on October the 9th. The week of October the 9th, fire departments are at every school during Fire Prevention Week. We stand up there, we talk to kids about stop, drop, and roll, smoke alarms, get out when the fire starts. We give them packets through the emergency management group in Rains County that talks about preparedness, animal care, the disaster planning. We can drop information in there from mom and dad. Those of us that do EMS, we have a vial of life. You keep it in your freezer. If you're over a certain amount of age, you're on a bunch of medications, you crap out in the floor, somebody finds you, I know where you're at. I go to your freezer, I open up this vial of life, tells me your name, your age, your date of birth, what medications, and what medical history you have. So you're unconscious. Now I have some kind of idea of what's going on. if we can get that, okay? Send that home to the kids. Mom and dad, your insurance policy, you need to store it in the vault of life or in the safety deposit box at the bank. So when stuff goes sideways, your house is now parked in Van Zandt County when it did belong in Rains County, you can walk up there into the committee and go, hey, this is what I had, this is what I have, this is what I need, how can you help me? 90% of their job is done because now they have all the paperwork, you've been educated, and you can step up and you can get your stuff taken care of quicker. Education in the long run, getting people to understand, you don't live in Dallas. You're not going to have people standing on your corner asking you what you need. You live in the country. Your closest hospital is 22 miles away. You have one ambulance in the county. You have to be responsible for yourself. You have to be educated on where your support groups are at. And you have to know what your rural community can and cannot bring to you. You cannot move from New York and expect Rains County, city of Canton, to have everything that the city of New York can bring to a disaster. I'll shut up now.
Okay, great, go.
Chris Basham, KSA Engineers. I'm an architect and a planner. We started with where this thing started in the toolkit and the idea, and what I understand is that a lot of the rural communities have no experience history in going through a disaster. So when it hits, there's a big question mark on everybody's head. And the reason there's a question mark is because there's such a low frequency and a low probability anything like that would happen. You don't expect 7 tornadoes to come through at one time. So it was like, oh wow, what do we do now? Where are they now? There were several points that were made. There was part of the slow start, and the reason the toolkit and the committee was put in place is nobody knew how to get started. And that's a common occurrence on any kind of natural disaster. Number 2, the main focus was get people in houses, get people in shelter. So we went back to Maslow's hierarchy, food, shelter, the whole thing, how do you get them started? One of the big things was the Catholic Charities and the Salvation Army were some of the biggest starting contributors to getting the process rolling. And it's their case managers that were handling it. And we'll talk about the case managers later. Another thing that they learned here is that it's best to have local control. And one of the things that happened at Katrina and some of the other things is the feds were coming in and they know nothing about the local situation. They have their processes and stuff, but nobody knows the people, the place, and the local processes and the local resources. So this process here is basically creating local control where you have local knowledge, local care, local vesting, and local impact. Put the control back in local. So one of the advantages of this is starting to get the money back focused down where the control needs to be. 5. The regional planning and response was mentioned. We talked about that also, and that Rockwall actually came over here and gave y'all some lessons learned. So that was an initial start at that regionalism. And there's a big push nationally on regional planning and regionalism. This all ties into that too. But I would not, and you go back to the COGS and stuff, and I didn't get to draw it, but there's basically the national level, the state level, the regional level, local level, and the individual level. And when you start looking at the resources for recovery, they come from all of those different levels. In what degree depends on what you have set up. There's also a distribution system that comes from all those levels, and that has to be worked into what you're doing locally. And as we've heard from several of the groups, there's still an individual responsibility. In that process, if they don't fill out their paperwork, they're not going to get funding. So maybe one of the things to do is look at how do you ease that process. So I guess where do we go from here? We're looking at providing help. I wrote down help has to be visible, easily accessible, responsive, responsible, and effective. And if your processes don't do those things in all these levels, then it's not going to work. More volunteers are needed. How do you do that? You can only go so much with one well. Of course, you always dig another well. And I think somebody responded to that. When those emotions get enacted by an event, you'll get more of that. We also wrote down, you need to be organized for sustainability. This is a great committee. It's all volunteer right now. How do you promote it staying in place? And how do you promote it expanding to other counties? And how do you expand that need? Need to allow an advanced coordination of resources. There's a lot of resources here. What was it? Somebody said 17 churches or 1,700 churches or whatever. That's a heck of a resource. but you need to document all of that too. And so I think that one of the things that possibly get lost in it is the lessons learned. So the process of setting up the committee allows for that documentation of lessons learned so you can go forward with that. And I guess the bottom line was the funding kind of thing. And then I wrote down something that hit in my mind was rural recognition and eligibility. As I mentioned, all those levels, and you get down to that local level, there's a difference when you're funding rural than you're funding urban. There's a difference in the society and how it's made up. Rural communities are pretty independent, and that interdependency is different than it is in an urban environment, and that'll change their process. Did I miss anything?
It's always interesting each time because, as I predicted, every group came up with a different perspective, a different set of answers. What I'm going to do for you at the moment, however, is kind of take you back, give you a bit of perspective both from the national level with some of the work that we have done. I've been involved in this stuff for almost a quarter of a century, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. So some of the evolution of this whole process over time, the way in which ideas have evolved about how best to handle disaster recovery, but also some other perspective in terms of the way in which ideas have evolved and how they fit into your particular situation. I'm going to walk you through both some general ideas that we've developed over time, as well as some case studies that I think are kind of relevant to rural circumstances in particular. Because one of the things that always concerned me as we were developing our work at the American Planning Association was not just to have ideas and procedures and policies and ideas that worked for large urban areas or even moderate-sized cities, but also things that can work in more rural areas where the situation is a bit different. And so just a little background on my own work. Back about 10 years ago at the American Planning Association, we created something called the Hazards Planning Center. It was actually one of 3 national centers for planning under the umbrella of the American Planning Association. But the Hazards Planning Center in particular really rolled up a lot of previous work that we had done, kind of a legacy and a pedigree that we had created at APA around the issues of hazard mitigation and disaster recovery. Interestingly, the 2 other centers in the National Centers for Planning include one that's called a Green Community Center that's more environmentally focused, and one that is called Planning and Community Health Center. That one is the one that's running the national program that provided the Plan4Health grants down to state chapters of APHA and APA, and that got the original large grant from the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta to do that, CDC being a federal entity that is focused on public health research and disease control. So I want to preface this, and this is where the second slide here comes into play, by saying that we spent a good deal of time in the last couple of years that I was at APA. I left, as was mentioned, at the end of May, trying to develop a little collaboration between the hazards piece and the public health piece between our 2 centers in order to get at questions of public health in the post-disaster period, both response and recovery. I do want to take a second and talk about what is different about recovery from response, because this is not often well understood, and we've had a lot of discussions between emergency managers and planners, we representing the planners at APA, about this. Because response is basically that immediate period when you're trying to evacuate people, do search and rescue, get the electricity back on, get the traffic lights back on, clear the roads of debris, that sort of thing, in order to begin to approach some level of normal functionality of a community, to at least allow it the space to begin to deal with issues of long-term recovery. So that's why I put this little triangle up there, because it really also, there's a lot of public health involved in working effectively to reach this recovery period. And it's important that we understand that there is going to be this transition. And from a planning standpoint, looking at the emergency management circle that FEMA has long had, there's a bit of a diagram that I didn't include here that shows, hazard mitigation, response, recovery, and you go around the circle, because I've long said the aftermath of one disaster is the prelude to the next. Anything that has happened once in your community, and not just in your memory, but has happened, period, is possibly going to happen again. The return period, what's known as how often does this sort of thing happen in plain English, may be long and it may be very short. And I've worked in situations that go from both ends, flooding that recurs every few years and is sort of a nuisance problem in the community. And you can pretty much count on seeing it within a generation, to something that may be, something that happens once in a few centuries. I was over in Sri Lanka, for instance, in 2005, after the Indian Ocean tsunami. That was estimated to be basically about a 400-year event. Nobody could remember when it had last happened. I actually looked it up and found out it was a little more recent than they had remembered, because there was such a tsunami, milder tsunami, but such a tsunami after Krakatoa blew up in 1885. But nobody remembered that. That shows, if it's beyond our lifetime, we tend not to remember that such a thing has happened. But nonetheless, the record was there, it was capable of happening, and no one was prepared. So that's just a fact to keep in mind. So one of the things I wanted to bring up here, and this is a slide that at first you may say, well, what does this have to do with anything? It's important background from the standpoint, particularly the planning profession. There was a time when planners generally assumed that if it had to do with disasters, it was the job of emergency managers. And certainly the response function is. Absolutely. A good deal of hazard mitigation emergency managers are involved in. But so should planners be involved in the hazard mitigation and in the recovery process, because they're both very long-term things, and they also tend to often involve the skills that planners bring to the table, both in terms of involving the public and understanding how to engage the public in decision-making, as well as understanding some of the long-term land use implications of a great deal of what goes on with regard to hazard mitigation, which ought to factor into some of the plans for recovery, looking at reassessing, does this kind of development belong in this particular location, or should we be thinking about changing some of those land use patterns in order to minimize the level of danger to which we are exposing people. So what's this slide about? Well, in 2015, I was asked to be on a panel at something called the Natural Hazards Workshop out in Colorado. It's an annual conference that brings together disaster professionals from a wide range of fields, emergency management, planning, civil engineering, sociology, behavioral scientists, public health. Whoever touches the field of disasters shows up at this thing, about 400 or 500 people every year. And so it was their 40th annual conference. They've been doing this for a while. And several of us were asked to provide perspectives from different professions on what had changed over those 40 years and then project going forward. So I put an intern to work for several months, actually, gathering data from our conference people at APA. We have a big annual national planning conference every year, sorting out, classifying the sessions that were held. We have about 180 to 200 sessions every year to identify the ones connected to either natural hazards in some way, or in more recent years, climate change has gotten onto the agenda as well, and which has serious hazard mitigation implications, by the way. So it's not a subject that we can avoid, and I choose not to. Some people like soft pedal the climate change stuff. Not everybody wants to hear that. No, I feel like we have to discuss that, or we're talking around problems. But anyway, way back in 1995, the first year for which we had data available, and we basically got a 20-year stretch, there were all 73 people attending 2 sessions at our annual conference. This is out of typically recent years, about 5,000 people attend. By the time we got to Seattle in 2015, there were 23 sessions that attracted almost 3,000 people. You can see this, and notice the jump. We get a bit of a jump right after Katrina. We get a bit of a jump a couple years later, 2008. What's happened? Hurricane Ike, as well as Gustav, but also the 2008 Midwest floods up in Iowa, Minnesota, and that area in the Midwest. Big events that tend to cause these spikes, and then they go up. And notice that the trough doesn't drop back down to here. It kind of, maybe a little bit, but it's sustained. The growth in interest has sustained itself to the point where we got here, and we're pretty much, plateauing in here somewhere until something else big happens, and that hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria in succession may well drive these numbers way up for the 2018 conference in where? New Orleans. What better place to find some interest, right? So you can see, I bring this up because this is a radical sea change in the level of professional interest in this topic that is bearing a lot of fruit in terms of raising the level of expertise that is available to your communities, because planners are showing a lot more interest. If you had asked people back here, a lot of times they would have said, oh, I don't know. Now they're like, no, I've been to sessions, I've educated myself. And so this is just sort of a change in the number of sessions we've offered, and it keeps going up because the demand is there, the interest is there, more people want to attend these sessions. One thing I want to mention also before I leave these slides, you are very fortunate in Texas on the academic front, because I had some other slides that I showed in Colorado having to do with the schools that are offering curricula around this, planning schools that are offering curricula around this subject matter, level of the number of peer-reviewed journal articles and that sort of thing. I won't go into all that here. But you have one school in particular that has for some time now specialized in and developed students and generated graduates who are well trained in this stuff, which is Texas A&M. And so, yeah, honest to God, it is one of, yeah, so it's one of a relatively small number of planning schools. There's 135 graduate schools of planning in the U.S., but a relative handful that have really, led the pack. That's one of them, Cal Poly in California, University of North Carolina, and then I'm helping elevate the level at the University of Iowa since I teach a course out there as an adjunct. But I think it's extremely important that the number of planning schools teaching this curricula is growing. Your battery is running low?
Sorry.
Is the battery in here? On the laptop. Oh, do we need to plug in the laptop? Is that what's going on here? I thought the laptop was drawing from the connection here.
The laptop is not plugged in at all.
Okay, so where did I put my laptop bag? There it is. Yeah, there's this. No, that's not mine. Where's my bag? Yeah. Where did I put it? I had to bring it in. Somebody must have moved it. Okay. Well, let's get to. What can we plug it into?
There's an outlet over here.
Oh, okay. So let's get that plugged in there. We'll have to wrap that around and into the back here. Sorry about that. Learning on the job. No, that's not going to work. No, it's a bad fit. I got to find my bag. What did I do with it? I had to bring it into. Did we move it somewhere? Where the hell did my bag
What's the
go?
color of the bag?
Oh, it's black.
There's one here. I don't know if it's-
Oh, that's it. No, that's not it. No, it's
What's written on it? What kind of,
where'd it go?
what's the inscription on it?
No, there's no description. Somebody. Yeah, that looks like it. No, that's not it either. Where? Now I'm mystified. Where would somebody must have picked it up and moved it? So I had it up front. No, it's not that. Well, this is really mysterious. Where? How could that? I brought it in. I had to in order to bring it. This is. Ah. I don't think so, because I had to bring it in order to put the laptop up. I had it up front. Yeah, but that's not it. This is absolutely.
Okay, let's change over to another computer.
Okay. But I still got to find that thing.
Did you put the slides already on that flash drive?
No, because I was just working off of here. But where the hell could the bag go? Huh? That's it. How did it pick? No, we got it, but how did it ever get back there?
I have no idea. Somebody just spotted it. It's open. It's open.
Okay.
So, there you go.
While they're trying to fix this, sorry about this. This happened to me last week in Austin, so I feel for him. my whole presentation crashed in the middle of my presentation. One thing that Kelsey made
here we go.
known to me a little while ago. Some of you guys want to know who's here so you can communicate with each other. I believe she's working on a roster right now. If you do not want your information, your email released on that roster, please let her know. Otherwise, we're going to pull that together. We'll get that emailed out to you. Also, if we can, I believe we can make these presentations available on our website, or if you want them emailed to you, we can do that as well. So I think that's all I have. Like, stretch.
Okay, now we should be good here.
Are we
Okay,
almost there?
we're there.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Actually, the disconcerting part was I had no idea where that bag went. Apparently somebody moved it into the kitchen. Not me. Okay, so yeah, if I can get your attention again. So at APA, given that history, and that I think that history was in part driven by many of the things we were trying to do at APA. It didn't just happen. I think we helped make it happen. It was very critical that we had the functions and the capacity that we did at APA to keep pushing the issue forward and to be there when Katrina happened, to be there when Sandy happened, to be there at the right moments to, work off of those events to push forward the issue that planners needed to be involved in this stuff and needed to build some skills. So we basically finally decided as